Trigger warning. This video contains mentions of gun violence and hate crimes, specifically against the LGBTQ and Latino communities. I hope you'll forgive me for starting off this entry on a bit of a somber note. I promise I will try to end this with some positivity. The reason that I'm writing and recording this is that today, 12th of June 2024, marks the 8-year anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida. For those of you who may be in middle school or younger and may not have experienced this in real time or at all, allow me to elaborate. In the early hours of that morning, a terrorist entered the Pulse nightclub, a local LGBTQ bar, as it was celebrating a themed Latino night. He immediately opened fire, killing 49 people and wounding dozens of others before a standoff with the local police ended in his death. It was, to that point, the deadliest terrorist attack on U.S. soil since 9/11, and the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history, full stop, a statistic that would unfortunately be broken just over a year later in Las Vegas. It was also the second incidence of high-profile gun violence in Orlando in as many days, following the shooting of Christina Grimmie at one of her concerts. That 1-2 punch shook the world, and in particular the queer community who had been specifically targeted in that attack. For me, it hit hard. There is a video on my second YouTube channel that is basically me trying to process it in real time. I had just turned 21 and was years away from being diagnosed autistic. I had only come out to my family as bisexual at the start of 2016, before I began my semester in the UK. In fact, I had only been out publicly to the world for 2 months. I was finally beginning to feel comfortable and, more importantly, safe enough in who I was that I could live my life openly. My sister was going to attend Up North Pride with me in support. It was going to mean so much. I felt free. What should have been a joyful celebration of queer identity for all in attendance suddenly became a funeral march. The march itself was much more muted than in previous years. There were tears and uncertainty. Everyone seemed to be asking themselves the same question. Where do we go from here? 8 years later, I wonder how much progress we have made since. Perhaps that moment was the beginning of a backlash. Despite the indisputable fact that the gunman had targeted a queer nightclub, no major news outlet was willing to designate the shooting as a hate crime. To me, there was no question. It didn't matter that he hadn't out and out said, "I hate gay people and I'm going to shoot them." He still chose to target a queer venue, and queer people died that night as a result of his actions. I remember feeling frustrated that no one seemed to be willing to go to bat for us in the wake of this tragedy. This year, now almost a decade removed from that horrible day, we can now start to really analyze this event and its context in queer history from a greater distance. In hindsight, it seems to me that Pulse marked the end of a euphoric period for the queer community that had begun the previous June with the Obergefell v. Hodges Supreme Court decision, which finally legalized same-sex marriage in the entirety of the USA. It was a victory decades in the making, and, to me at least, it was the beginning of a new era of acceptance and love, one in which I finally felt safe in openly being who I am. It seemed like we were on top of the world, and then 49 of us were taken. The negative setbacks in our community seemed to snowball almost immediately after the shooting. First came the Brexit vote, and then that fall, Trump was elected to office. And then, so many laws started being passed in states across the country to take away our rights. Drag began to be criminalized. The Supreme Court decided that religious freedom included the right to discriminate against queer people. book banning movements sprung up everywhere. A college professor from my alma mater did not have his contract renewed because he officiated a same-sex wedding. J.K. Rowling decided to become a full-on turf monster and one of the most prominent and influential anti-trans voices in the UK. The Prime Minister has openly invalidated the existence of trans people to thunderous applause. And now, the same justices that sat on the Supreme Court in 2015 are openly floating the idea of walking back that ruling that said queer people could marry. Pride is a protest as well as a celebration, but more so recently it has felt more like the former. I suppose there has been so much negativity as of late that I am becoming numb to it. It's not surprising anymore to see the same hateful rhetoric again and again and again. And every time someone tries to beat us down, it feels more and more exhausting and difficult to get back up again. But going back to the 12th of June, 2016, I want to bring up another event that occurred that day. That evening was the 70th Tony Awards, honoring the previous season of Broadway theater. Hamilton had just opened the previous summer, and by that point it was an international phenomenon widely expected to sweep that evening's awards. It lost 2, by the way, but still came away with 11 wins. Not too shabby. It was all my friends and I could talk about in the preceding week. By the time the ceremony began, we as a community had been struggling all day from the moment we woke up to come to terms with what had happened. And so James Corden began the ceremony alone on stage, camera facing the entirety of that season's theater community behind him, as he spoke these words directly to the audience at home. People all around the world are trying to come to terms with the horrific events that took place in Orlando this morning. On behalf of the whole theater community and every person in this room, our hearts go out to all of those affected by this atrocity. All we can say is you are not alone or on your own right now. Your tragedy is our tragedy. Theater is a place where every race, creed, sexuality, and gender is equal, is embraced, and is loved. Hate will never win. Together, we have to make sure of that. Tonight's show stands as a symbol and a celebration of that principle. End quote. He then proceeded with a wonderful opening number that exemplified that principle perfectly. And for the next 3 to 4 hours, it felt as though a weight had been lifted off for a little while. In the face of a tragedy committed against the queer community, we were allowed to revel and celebrate in one of the queerest institutions in the arts. I'll never forget bursting into tears when Lin-Manuel Miranda's voice cracked as he proclaimed that love is love is love is love is love is love is love, cannot be killed or swept aside. I cried writing this as I watched the performance of Yorktown with the muskets removed, a searing image of that evening. That evening felt like a giant embrace that our community desperately needed in that moment. We were taking each other by the hand and letting each other know that we were going to get through this, and we were going to get through this together. I had a similar feeling earlier this month when I went to see an artist called Girly at the Wardrobe in Leeds. There, in that downstairs venue, in the face of so much hatred from the outside world, we were safe in those walls to truly be ourselves and have a rollicking good time. The queer community has endured so much for so long that, damn it, we're still bloody here, and we're not going anywhere anytime soon. And so, as we continue the fight, hard as it is getting, for the right to exist as we are and to be accepted. And it is an exhausting fight. But let's not forget to celebrate and be proud of ourselves too. We deserve it. Love, Helen. Before I go, I just want to say that there are two very consequential elections coming up this year in the US and the UK, which will prove instrumental to the progress that our community will make in the future. It is incredibly important that you exercise your right to vote. So to that end, in the description, I will link some resources to make sure that you are registered and have all the information that you need. Thank you.